Yeah, so there's the two constitutional amendments that voters can vote on are Amendment 1 and Amendment 4. So Amendment 1 deals with a real and personal property tax exemption for child care facilities. Now, this is not automatic. So if the voters ratify it at the polls, it still has to go back to the legislature for final approval, and they can modify it or amend it, anything under those regards. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to get in the weeds on this. So the legislature, we can't enact a law without constitutional authorization, which would be Article 10, Section 3 of the Missouri Constitution, so on and so forth, which requires taxes to be uniformly levied. Now, I won't go through exactly all the ballot language of this, but this deals with child care facilities primarily outside of the home. So you can take it's a tax exemption that's a real or personal property. So you're talking about, buildings, land, that type of thing, but it can't be your own home. Even if you say you have child care part of the time in your own home, so you can't say, hey, I want to deduct or have some type of tax exemption for your own house, even though, part of the time maybe you're watching kids in the basement or what have you. It has to be a separate facility to take that exemption. Now, if it's a larger facility and a separate facility, and say it's a business that's doing it, but they're doing other things besides that to a smaller degree, but their primary purpose is childcare, then there's room to take an exemption. But they're basically they're aiming this at childcare facilities to give them a tax break on this. That's what it's designed to. It's not for individuals to say, hey, I watch my kids at home, otherwise probably everybody would be doing it. It's basically for standalone childcare facilities. And again, there can be certain exceptions if, like I said, you have a situation where maybe somebody lives at a separate childcare facility, and they do that like maybe the majority of the time, they're doing something else. Part of the time, they can still take that exemption. So this was passed. This was SJR 26. The Senate voted 33 to 1 in favor of it. We voted 91 to 27 in favor of it. There was one present vote. It's Travis Fitzwater's bill, SJR 26. I voted for it. So just a little, background on this. Originally, it was slated to be on the November 5th ballot, but Governor Parson unexpectedly issued an executive order on May 28th, exercising his constitutional authority to set an earlier election date. He had a news release, but he didn't explain his reason for changing the date, nor why did he wait so long to do it. He just did it. And I don't know if it has anything to do with, a smaller voter turnout or what have you. But he just unexpectedly said, we're going to do this on August for this period. Some negative ramifications for this. So there is there's a constitutional provision. It goes back to, I believe, 1875. It's a blind pension fund, and money from property taxes go into this fund. So by doing this, in theory, you're going to be reducing the blind pension fund. And it's for people who are blind, not just, sometimes you hear the word blind, you think it just means people don't know what's in it. So it's going to reduce the funds that go into this. Now, they say that the people who receive the pensions are not going to receive any less. So it's not that people are going to be getting less money, but the fund is going to be depleted, obviously, anytime you have a property tax exemption. So that's really the only issue. And again, if, like I said, if ratified, it still has to come back to the legislature to finalize it. So most likely, the governor could do something at veto session with this. I doubt it. So we go back September 11th. He could, so if it's ratified, he could say, hey, when you guys come back, he has to call a special session, he has to state specifically what he's going to do. So, but he could bring it up at veto. So he could say, I want the legislature to go ahead and enact this so the voters pass it in August. I doubt it. I haven't heard anything about that in regards to him doing that. So I doubt that's going to happen. He could call a special session and have the legislature finalize this. I doubt he would do that either. So most likely it would be next legislative session when we get taken up. It passed, so I doubt it would, the legislature would not do it, although, as you know, it gets very chaotic down there and anything can happen. I would think next year, not being an election year, things should go a little more smoothly, but you know how that goes. So that's the only real negative. I mean, you got the blind pension fund, but then you have the basic other arguments that go along with tax exemptions that pertain to this, which are universal to everything else, and that you could shift the overall tax burden to other taxpayers who don't have an exemption. Other people, so people say, hey, I'm saving on property taxes, or I'm sending my, so you could say it keeps a child care facility open, but then the person sending their kids to the child care facility could see their tax bills go up because, municipalities could compensate for that, that lost tax revenue. There's no guarantee that, and not that it's explicitly stated as a purpose, but that child care facilities would pass those savings on to individuals. So, people might think, well, no, they're getting an exemption. My child care bill is going down. That might not be the case, but I don't know that was the specific intention. I think the intention was to create these facilities because child care is really an epidemic in the state. I mean, it's just very difficult to find affordable child care, which is really a workforce issue and a problem in the state and nationwide. So that's really some of the anti-arguments. I mean, I would say positive would be primarily just the, people would stay in business, right? Because they have a tax exemption, and we could have more child care facilities around the city and the state. So I don't know, again, as far as, like I said, there's some negatives, but I think overall it's positive. I don't think it's a negative thing. I think it's a good idea to address the child care crisis right now we have. And yeah, there's some downfall, but I don't know that overall the negative outweighs a positive. And I can't imagine, people would suffer that much with this tax exemption. I mean, how many facilities really are there for something like this? So that's Amendment 1. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I do. I have two things. One, on the people that do daycare, I think a very high portion of them may be the ones that do it at home. But there's also a separate one as far as home. I've also heard of home daycare that actually have a separate building that they use for the daycare, but they still limit it. They follow under the rules of a home daycare rather than a business. Would the home daycare that is in a separate building from their own home be able to count as a business, or do you know?
Well, so here's the funny thing about that question. The language of this, so Amendment 1, so the subsection Article 10, it would go into Article 10, subsection 6 of the Constitution. And here's the way it reads, and I don't necessarily need to go into all of it. Because the availability of childcare supports the well-being of children, families, the workforce, society as a whole, all property, real and personal, used primarily for the care of a child outside of his or her home may be exempted from taxation by the general law. If a portion of the property of an individual or for a profit or nonprofit corporation, organization, blase, used for child care, an assessing authority may be authorized by general law to exempt from the assessment levy collection taxes. So really the defining language in here, it just says, which I'm not crazy about how this is written, because it says used primarily for the care of a child outside of his or her home may be exempted from taxation. So
that sounds like it could count home care.
Right. I would think if there's a separate facility that has, so you're saying if somebody has a home daycare.
Yes, but they don't.
No, I think if the home daycare is used, is it primarily, would it be, 40 hours a week around the clock?
No, probably not. But I'm saying somebody that is, they don't have they have a personal daycare or 2 people. They only limit themselves to 10, but they have a separate facility. They don't do it in their own house.
Yeah, sure.
So I would think that would count.
I would think that facility would count. I don't think their home would count, but if they had a separate facility, absolutely.
Okay, and the bigger issue, since many of the at-home people that have their daycare in their home may not get counted, do you have you heard anything about what the difference is of how many people are taken care in at home daycare facilities as compared to more commercial or nonprofit ones?
That's an interesting question. There's other, the legislature, when they try to get at something, they usually do somewhat strange things. So I remember we dealt with the bill not long ago that dealt with home businesses, and what they decided, I can't remember if it was a taxation issue or whatnot, but they said, well, if you can't tell there's a business there, then you're allowed to run a business. I think it was whether or not you could have a business in your home for zoning purposes or whatnot, which would seem more of a local issue. But they decided, well, if you can't tell that there's a business being run there, then that's acceptable. But if you can tell there's a business being run there, then you can't do that. I say that to say that, as an example, the way this is written, I think there's some leniency in a gray area.
Okay.
If you could do it at your home, it doesn't give an amount. So it doesn't say above 10 kids, less than 10 kids.
Yeah.
They want it to be a separate facility. I guess what they're trying to get away from is someone saying, I watch my kids here and maybe one other friend, therefore I don't have to pay tax on my house.
Right.
I would think if you are running a home daycare, you could take, I would argue you can make an argument for exemption if you're running a home daycare. Like I said, there's not a lot of specifics. It doesn't say above this amount, below this amount. I think what they don't want is someone saying, I watch my kids and maybe there's one other kid that comes, I watch them. It's talking about for-profit or non-for-profit. So I think if you have an LLC set up, I would make the argument, if you have an LLC set up or a C Corp set up in your home and you're watching children as part of a business, you would be able to take the tax exemption if that's the primary purpose. But if, I would argue that you have a handful of kids in your own home, 2 or 3, I don't think they're trying to get at that. I think what they're trying to get is standalone facilities that offer childcare. I can't hear
you. Let me follow up on that. Will the legislature then have a bill clarifying some of this stuff if it passes? It does seem really vague.
I agree. They could. I mean, I would argue that they should do that as opposed to just sending it through. They can modify it. They can get into details. I think it needs to be specified exactly what that means. When it says primarily for the care of a child outside of his or her home may be exempted from taxation. I would think that that's a full-time daycare facility is what I would think. I mean, recently we toured a place about a year and a half goes behind Burger King. I can't remember the name of it. It was a child care facility. I'm sure the woman lived there, but we did a walkthrough. It was me, Caleb Rowden, and maybe Kathy Steinhoff. It was about a year or so ago. And it looked like it was a child care facility. It was a home. But if you did a walkthrough, you wouldn't think, oh, someone's living here. You would think it's a child care facility. They had like a special kitchen set up, playrooms, all of that. I think that's what they're primarily trying to get at, is those types of things. Could someone skirt it and try to get over and just try to get the exemption? Sure. But I think they're trying to get at standalone facilities can be used as an exemption if you're doing it out of a house. I don't think they want it to be as if you're just, if you're just watching a couple of kids, maybe your kids and another child. It's supposed to be somewhere else. So it's definitely not for your children, okay, in your home. It would be where children are sent. But there's a lot of nuance here, right? As far as who qualifies and who doesn't.
Nancy, your question?
Several questions here. I do think I read, and I don't remember which paper I read that in, that KIP had done a study of how many currently there were in the county, and I believe I saw the number 42, and he figured how much tax that would be, how much it would cost the county, because he could figure that, but he could not figure how much it would cost every school district in the county, right, and every library board and every health department, because once you start chopping away at property taxes that support all of those things, then the money has to come from someplace else. So that's a concern I have. And I also have a question. For instance, let's suppose Veterans United decides that they're going to put daycare centers in every one of their facilities. I think it would be a good idea if they did, but let's suppose they block off a section in every one of their facilities for a daycare center. Does that mean then that they get to deduct all of their property tax or part of their property tax or part of their, I think we're really getting into some complications here. And then another question I have is, how is this like or different from the three proposals that Representative Brenda Shields had that were moving along fairly rapidly because the governor liked them, but they got screwed up with the Senate at the end? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I remember with Brenda Shields' her child care bill, and people were excited about that. I think it may be slightly different from this. I don't know all the details of her bill. I know we passed out of the House, but obviously I think it's gone into no man's land. But I'd have to look that up. As far as, the question about who can take an exemption and what if VU does something. I mean, the way I read the language is it has to be property primarily used for childcare. So the way I read this is if VU had a separate facility just for childcare, they could exempt that property. Now, if they had part of a building in the back for childcare, I would say the way this is written, no. The property has to be primarily used for childcare. So if they have a separate outbuilding for childcare, they could get an exemption. But if it's within the facility in the back or in the basement, the answer would be no, because I don't think you can make an argument that it's primarily used for childcare. I think they're looking at standalone facilities that are primarily used for childcare.
Oh, but let me just mention on something like Veterans United, you go all around town and there are all sorts of strip malls, and they could take a part of a strip mall. And still, I think Nancy's point is really important because they could have 20 of them around town easily.
But is that a bad thing? I mean, if they're providing childcare to their workers,
No.
It's
not
A
necessary.
loss of a lot of income too.
right? That's I'm looking at the language to see if, if I'm VU, I'm making that argument, and I'm maybe trying to look for a way to save on taxes by doing that. If you have a separate facility, if they're going to do it anyway. So I can see VU doing this. Say they had, 3 locations, and they were going to, in the basement of one location, they're going to have childcare. In the back of one, they're going to have childcare. Saying, based on this, let's have a separate building and exempt it. So as opposed to having, they have all those satellite offices everywhere all over Columbia, it would encourage someone to have a dedicated office or a dedicated building just for childcare, as opposed to having it, in the back or upstairs or downstairs.
Mary Jo, is a question?
Yes, is this tied at all to accreditation? Because the reason I ask this is there's some truly terrible childcare centers and there's some very good ones. And it seems to me like it should be tied to accredited centers.
That's a good idea. It's not, but it should be.
It's not.
It really should be, because anybody they can all strive and get to be accredited. This would be a really easy way of bringing up the quality of care. Childcare in itself is not enough.
I'm gonna make a note of that, just because when it does come back up, if it does pass, that would be something to deal with in the future, to modify this, put in accreditation. I think that's a good idea, actually.
And there's a really good accrediting system in childcare. It's a national system, so it could be done. And some of the best centers are going to be accredited, but there are an awful lot that are not.
I wonder, of the 42 that we have in the county, how many are accredited versus how many are not accredited?
I don't know.
The only problem would be, say, only 20% are accredited. Then what?
Well, then they work to be accredited so they can get the tax exemption. I mean, to me, it's motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got the other side.
Those 42, I would assume that those 42 have all been at least licensed, or Kip would not have known how many there were. There must
Yeah,
be some
there's-
kind of a license you have to apply for.
Well, they have to be licensed to be operational in this county at least, and but accredited, they don't have to be. That's the thing they choose to take on to show their quality. And if, you know, if I were a parent hunting for childcare, I'd be looking for accredited centers.
Absolutely.
I used to be the director of Educare, and I'm concerned too about the family childcare homes and the way that's written. So I urge you to look at that carefully, because accredited family childcare homes should also be eligible, it would seem to me. They worked hard, they're big enough to be recognized, but the way it's written, the primary purpose of the home still is a place for the family to live, even though they may have converted their basement and living room to childcare. It's, you know, it's a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I think the language where it says primarily, you know, what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Does primarily mean primarily I live there, or primarily I do care there? You know, it is ambiguous. I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. And another point to that, I think, just like what you said, that if, you know, the state is not making you pay taxes, why should we do that if it's just a free-for-all facility, right? You know.
I think we need to move on to the Kansas City
Okay.
police issue, but first, one more question off the chat. Is there any other way to support the blind pension fund?
I think it's primarily from taxes, property taxes. So let's see. I don't know, unless you create some other, I mean, it's based on statewide property tax. It generates revenue for the pensioning of the deserving blind as provided by law. So that's how it comes through, is through property taxes. A statewide, unless you levy some other kind of property tax or raise property tax somewhere else, but you know, that's a more of a complicated beast to do something along those lines. Whether that's constitutional, I don't know at this point, but yeah, it has to come through property taxes. So, but there may be, and I could look into that to see if there's another funding mechanism for that.
Well, this was supposed to be the non-controversial issue. So what about the other one that we have in the ballot?
Okay, so the other one's a bit more complex. So Amendment 4 deals with funding of the Kansas City Police Department. So what this does, in essence, and I had to give a little bit of background about this. So it creates an exception to the Hancock Amendment. So the Hancock Amendment prohibits unfunded mandates towards local municipalities. Okay, so there's a prohibition against an unfunded mandate to a local municipality. What Amendment 4 does is it carves out an exception to that so that Kansas City can pay their police officers more. And so what's going on in Kansas City is, I believe it was back in about 1950, there was a state law that said all Kansas City's revenue, all the revenue that they take in, 20% has to go to the police department. So there's been a lot of scuttlebutt about, are they paying the police enough in Kansas City? Now, Kansas City is controlled, their police department is controlled by a state board of police commissioners, and they're the only municipality or police department in the state that's run that way. St. Louis used to be run that way, not any longer. Now they're run locally, but Kansas City is run by a state board. All the people on that board are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, except the mayor, Quentin Lucas. He's a city employee. So 20% of the revenue is supposed to go to the police department. Now, there were discussions with the council. They were doing probably normal negotiations, trying to gain political leverage. And there might have been a thought that, hey, they're trying to decrease the funding or to fund the Kansas City Police. The Kansas City Police Department is being funded at a higher rate than the 20%. So they're already being given more money. No one is defunding the Kansas City Police Department. So this is an effort to increase the funding of the Kansas City Police Department. Now, this is 3 years old, right? So this initially came to the legislature about 3 years ago. It passed. It failed in Kansas City. Well, Kansas City voters voted against it, but it was a statewide initiative. So it passed statewide. Kansas City voters didn't want it. And so slightly before the election, Quentin Lucas filed a lawsuit against Jay Ashcroft saying, one, the ballot language was unconstitutional. because it said there was no fiscal impact for Kansas City. It went, and so this was in limbo and kind of being tossed around. It ended up in the Supreme Court, and couldn't prevail on a 4-3 vote that the language was basically unconstitutional. And one of the arguments that Quentin prevailed on was that it's going to cost the city $38 million to force Kansas City to increase the funding of the police department. So Judge Wilson said of the Supreme Court, the best way to remedy this, I'm sure they tweaked the language, is to put it back on the ballot and let the voters decide again. So this has been hanging out there for about 3 years, and now it's coming back. One of the issues with this is that if they do this and this goes through, and people in Boone County may not have a dog in this fight, but as you know, the legislature is after St. Louis as well. The whole Kim Gardner prosecutor issue, they're trying to have state control over St. Louis, which hasn't passed yet. And so this bill allows for the exception to create a mandate for police departments that are governed by a state board of commissioners. Okay, St. Louis does not have a state board of commissioners, but the legislature, primarily the Republican legislature, is trying to establish that type of model for St. Louis. And they got it through this year, it didn't pass, but that's what they've been trying to do. And they've got an eye on St. Louis. So, and again, we're here in Boone, so, we're not in St. Louis, Kansas City. However, if this goes through, then most likely if the legislature can get a board of commissioners to govern St. Louis, then they can direct this at St. Louis and force them to increase their pay. This is something that, when people talk about local control, they scream and shout about because they don't want someone else the state coming in from the outside and telling Kansas City how to run their department. Again, there's evidence that they're not paying at the 20% rate, they're paying more. There was never really an issue that they were paying less than the 20% or that they were trying to defund the police. I think that was all political rhetoric. So that's what's at play in Kansas City. There was another bill passed by the Republican legislature while all this was pending. I believe it was 678, Senate Bill 678, that required a 25% increase to the pay of the Kansas City police force. That hasn't been implemented, but that's hovering around out there as well. So a lot of Amendment 4 still could be argued as unconstitutional. And it's based on this whole defund the police idea that Kansas City City Council, that they're trying to defund the local law enforcement. And so it's designed to allow the state to come in and say, you have to pay the police department more than the 20% that they're required to pay. There's arguments in favor of this. If you believe that they're trying to defund the police and it prevents them from doing so, it will guarantee them more revenue. They already pay more than the minimum already. So it shouldn't have a huge of an impact because they're already paying more. Like I said, it passed the first time around, so people in the state want this. People in Kansas City don't want it. Some anti-opposition arguments. One, they say it's a flat out lie that people are trying to defund, the council's trying to defund the police department. It's just not true. Another thing about the language of Amendment 4, doesn't talk about the weakening of the Hancock Amendment and its prohibition against unfunded mandates. It's somewhat problematic. And again, people in Kansas City did not want this. Statewide they did, but the people in Kansas City opposed it. But it is somewhat problematic when you start telling the Kansas City Police Department what to do. And like I said, they're doing this in St. Louis. I mean, a lot of arguments down in Jeff deal with St. Louis as well, even more so St. Louis because of the crime situation. And they're constantly trying to, govern St. Louis and decide how St. Louis is going to be run. St. Louis used to have a board of commissioners that was state run a while back, and that changed local control. There's arguments whether that's good or bad. So that's what's going on here. It's allowing an exception to the Hancock Amendment to require Kansas City to increase the amount that they have to pay their officers or the police department.
I don't know where to go with that. Alice, you had a question? Ford? Unmute yourself, please.
Actually, my question was, if we have time, I wanted to hear if David has any suggestions on what was done to us by the legislature in the charter mandate, where Boone County Schools pays 100% rather than the split that we see in St. Louis and Kansas City. I mean, it's been called unconstitutional. What can we do about this?
Don't get me started on this. You know, so, and I don't know if you guys know the background of 727, the charter school bill. You know, that came through the legislature. We knew it was coming. That was on everyone's mind, Boone County legislators, you know, obviously to bring charter schools to Boone County. Caleb Rowden specifically targeted Boone County. This is awful. You know, I spoke about it on the House floor, as did the other reps about it. It barely passed the House by 82 votes. I was in the parking garage lobbying legislators. They came out to their cars telling them to vote no. And, you know, a lot of the people I had good relationships with, a lot of the Republicans, just about every Republican that I had a good relationship with or worked with voted no. And it barely passed. It passed by 82 votes. Three Democrats voted yes. And I've just seen that they've been given large contributions from dark money. One of them, who's running for Senate, I think it's over $10,000, if not more, and then maybe $17,000 additionally for mailings. So,
Wow.
And you know, one of the things about this that was so ominous was, you know, as the week that this happened, the week that it was coming to the floor, all of a sudden on social media, I saw charter schools, like a charter school company, advertise this and promoting it. And if you read the comments, virtually all the comments, except maybe one, people hated this. I mean, people hate this. The schools in Columbia are accredited. We don't need this bill. And people hate this bill. And it was basically Senator Rowden's last hurrah before he left to get this through. Now, specifically to your question about what can be done about this. So one of the things that I did, and some of the other reps from Boone did, is we filed amendments carving out I filed two amendments. One to carve out Boone County, so it wouldn't apply to Boone County. And the second one was that it would go to a vote of the people. And I'm confident that if we put it to a vote of the people, that it's not going to pass because people here don't want it. So I filed those amendments. And I also went to a Republican. We talked with a Republican who said he would file the same amendment, either, I think, taking it to the vote of the people. However, when we got to the House floor, the Speaker of the House and the Republican leadership decided they were not going to call on anybody who had offered amendments. Because if they call on you and you offer an amendment, you can offer the amendment. So even to speak on the bill, I had to have Crystal Quade. Crystal Quade was called on, and then she inquired of me. Now she inquires of me, I can speak about it, but I can't offer an amendment. So they didn't allow anyone to offer amendments on the bill. And so what I'm going to do, Senator Rowden's going to be gone. Don't tell anybody. I mean, you know he's going to be gone, but don't tell anybody what I'm going to do. So next session, I'm going to amend this and file a bill to carve out Boone County for voting purposes. And I'm going to either do one of the two, have it go to vote of the people, which I think is more palatable, or completely carve out Columbia. With Senator Rowden not being there, I don't know that we're going to have a huge fight other than just the normal difficulties in getting a bill passed. I mean, you know how we passed less than 50 bills this session. I think it's the lowest amount we ever passed, but there's a lot of other things going on there with Freedom Caucus and elections. So my goal is to move it again. And I don't think anybody is, I mean, most of the people really don't care about Columbia or Boone County, right? This was done for Senator Rowden. So I don't know that anyone's going to have staunch opposition to having it go to the vote of the people in Boone, right? And we have a bigger caucus now. We have more influence. We should have 4 Democratic reps plus, as you know, state senator. So things are going to be a little bit different. And I can tell the tone has changed. And Adrian Plank, he had some harsh words for the fellow Democrats who voted against this. Very harsh. I mean, it was talked about all session. I mean, it was about as harsh as you can get. And he let them know what his feelings were about that. So the game has changed a little bit down in the Capitol, because I noticed when I first got down there, you know, they were kind of cutting deals on our back, maybe not this bad, but I could tell that because there was only 2 of us, you know, they could kind of get away with a lot more, but not so much now. We were very adamant. We fought very hard about this this education bill, and it barely passed. Like I said, it passed by 82 votes. And there's some other good things. I mean, so the thing about it, we don't like the charter school piece, right? It does provide raises to teachers around the state. The problem is the teachers in Boone County already make the amount that they're supposed to make as far as a raise. So it doesn't really affect Columbia teachers. But there's not a funding mechanism in it for the other teachers. So rural teachers may make more money temporarily, but there's no funding in this to pay them. So what's going to happen next year when they don't fund it properly? Are they going to have to start laying people off? There is something else in there that no one's really talking about that is unconstitutional, I believe. And it's kind of buried within this. So the voucher system. So what you can do is you can give money, scholarship money for the voucher system. That's not charter schools. That's just to send a child to a different school and it's paid for by a specific voucher. Okay. Well, the voucher system is really an unconstitutional tax shelter because it allows you, so if you give a donation to the scholarship, so a child can take advantage of a voucher program, right? But then you get a tax credit for it. So I give $10,000 into this scholarship program. So that provides $10,000 for a student to go to a private school or do whatever he wants to do. But then on the back end, I take a $10,000 tax credit for doing that. So it allows people to take tax credits for paying into the system. But here's a problem with that. The way I understand this, you don't have to pay taxes on an increase in what you've given. So you could have capital gains that you haven't paid taxes on, and then you get a full tax credit. So say you buy stock at $20,000, your stock accumulates to say $100,000 over time, and you haven't paid taxes on it because you haven't cashed it out. You then donate that $100,000 in stock to the voucher program. Then you turn around on the other hand and take a $100,000 tax credit, and you've never paid taxes on your increase from $20,000 to $100,000. So that's $80,000 you haven't paid taxes on. So it creates this kind of nebulous tax shelter for you, where you can take assets that you have not been taxed on, donate them as scholarship, and then take a full tax credit on the other side. So that's one problem with it. But there's some positive things with salary raises, but I think a lot of that's not funded. So yeah, there is room to maneuver with Senator Rowden being gone. I think there's a way to get some things done and maybe carve out Boone. I don't know. There's a lot of hatred for Boone County down there, and the fact that we got everyone in the House to vote for it, all the Democrats except 3, and then all the Republicans to vote against. To vote against this bill. Like I said, this thing barely passed.
Nick Foster, good to see you here. And do you have a question?
Thanks. It's good to see you all again. And David, thank you for your presentation. And I have a question really that's extends a little bit beyond this, but I think is a more general concern. And that is about preemption itself. It seems that the legislature is becoming sort of play happy. Amendment 4 is an example of that. It's on a particular municipality. And I wonder if you have a sense of where the legislature is going with this in general and what might be behind this. That seems to me a little bit of a nebulous question, but it remains nebulous somewhat in my mind. I was in a meeting earlier this week where there was conversation about a bill that passed that preempts eviction moratoria so that localities and courts won't be able to do this locally anymore. So that's part of my concern. And as a local legislator, I'm concerned about what the state might be imposing on us into the future.
That's an excellent question, Nick. It's good to see you. One of the problems with the majority party Republicans is that they talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? So for years they talk about they want local control, local control, local control. But then when they want something, they're willing to abandon those principles outright. You're absolutely right. Amendment 4 is a preemption issue. You're having the state come in and decide how to fund a local municipality. The eviction moratoriums, that's somewhat of a different issue because I think it deals with whether you can stop a municipality from doing this or that. But I think the concept of coming into a local municipality and telling them what they can do, what they're doing with St. Louis, we hear every session in the legislature is nothing but preemption, right? But it's political because they want to talk about being tough on crime. They want to talk about we don't want to defund the police. And so it's easy to go after St. Louis, it's easy to go after Kansas City, but you're right. First of all, it's inconsistent with their principles, right? So if you want to have local control, why are you doing this? But they're doing it to score political points, and they do it to satisfy whatever political whim or whatever wind is blowing at the time. So when they want to when they want to do something that benefits them, local control, local control, local control. But then when the political winds are blowing a different way, when it's popular to go after St. Louis, then it's, hey, they throw that to the wind and let's do whatever we want to do here.
Thank
But
you,
that-
David. I see that Crystal Quade has joined us.
Absolutely. And just before she gets on, I would encourage you guys to vote for Crystal Quade. She's the best candidate in the race, so make sure you give her your full support and your vote. Good to see you, Crystal.
Crystal.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Okay, well, and David, thank you so much for that shout out and the awesome summaries of the amendments. I know that there's a lot going on right now. So thank you guys for giving me a few moments of your meeting to say hello and introduce myself. I think I know most of you on the call, but just a brief history in case y'all don't remember. I'm from Southwest Missouri. Grew up out in Webster County, and I've been serving the legislature for the last 8 years, elected out of Springfield. And when I first ran in 2016, we were the only Democratic seat south of Columbia in the whole state. And I've been serving as a Democratic leader for the last 6 years in the state house. And we've been spending a lot of time rebuilding infrastructure and electing more of us. We now have 3 Dems down in Springfield. Of course, you guys know in Boone County, we're up to 4 now, doing great work there. And we flipped some seats up in Platte County and Clay. And we are now only 3 seats away from breaking the Republican supermajority, which is super exciting. And so I jumped into this governor's race about a year ago. It's been a little over a year now, which is just wild that it's gone so quickly. But as you guys know, the last 8 years in Jefferson City have been very frustrating. Each year we have seen more divisiveness and more extremism from the folks in charge. And quite frankly, I feel like they are just more interested in winning their primary elections than they are in doing any investments in our state and real solutions. And this past year, we saw the least amount of public policies passed in Missouri's history. And that includes when we had COVID and we were gone for 6 weeks that year. So it's been really frustrating, not just for those of us who work in the building, but I know for folks all across the state, when we've had record surpluses, we are doing anything but moral decisions with those things. And I know David was talking a little bit about the education bill, it sounded like when I jumped in. We have the lowest paid teachers in the country, some of the lowest underfunded schools. We have roads and bridges that are crumbling. We've lost 18 rural hospitals in the last decade. We deserve much more than what we've been getting. And so we've been traveling the state over the past year, going to every corner, talking to not just Democrats, but of course, Republicans and independents, and lots of folks are really ready for something different. And I know we don't have a ton of time, so I will wrap it up there and open it up to as many questions as we can fit in the next few minutes. So thank you guys again for letting me say hi.
Nancy? Nancy, we can't hear you.
I had a question
Okay.
for the last issue. I'll pass on to somebody else.
Okay. Questions for Crystal?
Hi, this is Kathy Jensen, and I'm wondering, will you be doing direct mailing and TV ads, and when will that start for the primary?
Yeah, thank you.
This is for
Kathy.
Crystal.
Yes, we are doing TV ads that are up in Kansas City and St. Louis already. And so those have been up for, I think we're on the 2nd week now, and we'll continue to have those pushed out. We are hoping to raise enough money to have TV up in Springfield and Columbia here soon. But to be honest with you, that is where all of our money is going right now. So you won't be seeing mail come from our campaign. You may know the gentleman I'm running against is a self-funder. He's given about $1.25 million to himself on top of fundraising. And so right now for the primary, we are having to be really smart with our dollars and pour those into the places where we know folks are going to pick up that Democratic ballot. For the general, you will see an entirety of a normal campaign from door knocking to those mail pieces. And we are doing phone calling right now as well for the primary, but of course that will pick up in the general.
Scott?
Mrs. Quade, of course, the University of Missouri in Columbia is Boone County's greatest asset. And our concern has been with Missouri State and its rapid rise in prominence and volume. And Secretary of State Ashcroft's pledge to bring more money from the legislature from Columbia to Springfield is of much concern. Do you have a position on the support for the University of Missouri, its current doctoral programs, and its current mission as opposed to Missouri State? If that's an unfair question, but I don't know any other way to ask it.
No,
Thank
that's
you, ma'am.
totally fine. In full transparency, I do represent Missouri State in the legislature, and I do have my degree from Missouri State University. So I am from Southwest Missouri, but that said, I definitely understand the importance of Mizzou as being our flagship university and the importance that it brings to our economy. And for me, my answer to you is really what I would prefer us to be doing is looking as a state around where our investments are making the most sense. I don't like the fact that our universities are in competition with each other. And that's exactly what's been happening, is that we have to fight for those dollars and we pull from one to give to the other. And then I would also say our community colleges versus our four-year institutions. And what we should be doing, in my mind, is making sure that we're investing in our education everywhere so that we are one of the #1 states in the country for kids to be coming to. I think we should be looking at our competition versus Arkansas and, of course, the folks in Kansas versus our universities having to compete. What I've seen across the board in my time in the legislature is our budget not really being a moral document, but more of a who has the most power right now and which donors are given the most money. And that's where our priorities have gone from the folks in charge right now. And so you'll see from me a big investment in making not only higher education, but K-12 public funding also, our public schools also a big priority for me, and taking out some of those pork and special interest things so that we're competing less against each other and more just investing in our kids.
Thank you.
Stuart Herb?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say, I hope you will call upon us in Boone County. We've been having calls, some on your competition from Springfield. And obviously, a lot of people think business background is so great. We don't happen to, because we understand the difference on governmental and public services. And so I just saying, I think all of us locally need to talk up a lot for you. And I hope also that you will call upon us to try to do phone calls and get out some of your flyers too.
Thank you. Yes, if folks are interested in making phone calls, we do have phone banks that are active all the time to Democratic voters. And so we can, Amy, my manager's on the call, so she can drop in the chat the way to contact us if you'd like to help out with that. And of course, if folks are out knocking doors for Adrian or any of our, I know David, any of our local folks who are on the ground, we do have literature for us that folks can be handing out that's currently at the Democratic headquarters there in Columbia. We were just there the other day. And so we've dropped off all of that stuff. And so folks, I know Adrian is in probably the most contested seat right now, and he's out knocking every day, and their volunteers are carrying our stuff too and making sure that they're spreading the message. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks for being with us, Crystal. If you could send us more literature, we're giving it out at the Boone County Fair and we're actually running short. So I know Amy's on the call and we are canvassing. I'm doing some canvassing, others for Adrian. I just wanted to ask, I saw polls and I know we're really aware of your opponents spending a lot of money and being on TV ad nauseum, and you've got a lot of support in Boone, but we also have uneducated voters who aren't as aware of what's been going on in the state. The polls right before TV started were really strongly in your favor. Do we have any more recent polls that can still keep us uplifted as we work to elect you August 6th?
Yes, thanks for that. So what I want to tell you is that we know that folks are definitely with us when they hear our message. And when we did that polling, we knew going into this that we were going to be outspent quite a bit. And so for those of you who are data nerds and may have dug into that a little bit, we did simulate being outspent, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, to see kind of where that margin was for us, where it really becomes competitive and problematic. And so what I'll say to you is that we're still feeling pretty good about this. We are fundraising every day. Happy to say we had a $50,000 week last week. So those things that you saw, of course, we're pouring that extra into our TV commercials. But it is a serious race, and I don't want to act like we've got this in the bag. We do have every endorsement from the labor unions to our friends over at Planned Parenthood in the reproductive health space to the Sierra Club. And of course, just got the Kansas City Star the other day. So that was really exciting as well. Waiting on the Post-Dispatch to announce who they're endorsing. And of course, been doing the work on the ground and been going to our Democratic clubs and the state committee functions that they've had as well. And so we're still feeling really good, but we are taking it seriously, as we should.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that Crystal and her campaign talking about doing a visit to Columbia before the primary. So a good opportunity to get people out to actually hear Crystal in person, and that'll be really exciting. And get some media, local media.
Always helpful.
Can you say when that is?
So-
Can you remind us when that is?
Well, we're talking,
We're still
yeah, go ahead, Amy.
We're still finalizing. It'll be that final weekend of the campaign, probably Saturday, but we're still looking to lock in all the details. So if you've got thoughts, you can shoot them my way via email, but we'll be driving through the state for a final push.
Crystal, I will just say a quick comment. I'm noticing your yard signs. We need to get one. I'm not sure how many are at the headquarters, but I have not seen a single ham sign in Columbia.
I'm sort of putting them out strategically till August 6th. We don't have an unlimited supply, which is why you're seeing them on Broadway, West Boulevard, Green Meadows. We'll get you one as soon as we have more, but right now I think strategic locations like at Karen Miller's house is the way to go.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say, thank you. Again, we're having to be very strategic with our funding because of being against a millionaire who's putting his own money in. You can buy yard signs on our website if you're interested in getting one immediately, which is just crystalquade.com. But yeah, we do have a few at the headquarters, and we'll see if we are able to get some more out before then. But I really appreciate the support and willingness to help out, guys. What's really exciting about this race and the opportunity that we have in November, not just to win the governor's race, but as you all know, to get reproductive rights back in our state. And we are only 3 seats away from breaking the Republican supermajority in the state House and 2 in the Senate. And so that means when we win this in November, we can veto the bad things and uphold those vetoes and really stop the bleeding and be able to focus our energy on the things that actually matter and make the appropriate investments in our state. So I know that, as a Democrat, sometimes, especially lately, it's felt a little bit overwhelming. But I want to say to you guys that we really do have tremendous opportunity in Missouri this year. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't know that there was a pathway to win. And so I really am excited. And I appreciate all of you for continuing to dig in. I see so many faces on here that I have known you guys for years, and you are always the ones showing up and doing the work. So I just really want to say thank you for that.
And I want to thank you for taking your valuable time to talk to us this afternoon.
Of course.
And best of luck. One last question. We've seen a lot about Republican debates. I haven't seen anything about Democratic debates. Is there a debate coming up with your main opponent?
Yes, so we actually did a debate. KSDK in Kansas City, or excuse me, in St. Louis, and PBS was the only outlet who wanted to record one. And so we did do that. It aired on KSDK on Sunday, and then it will air again on PBS networks later on Wednesday of this week, on the 24th. But we do have links to that, and we'll share it out on our social media as well, as a way for you guys to watch it. Unfortunately, not all of the networks were interested in doing one for the primary, and so we took the only option that we had, which was up in St. Louis. But it will air again on PBS on the 24th.
Well, again, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to say hi. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Thanks,
Bye.
Amy.
Yeah. And David, thank you also for being here this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate all of you guys and the wonderful journey we've been on, and let's keep moving forward. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.
And let's get Rachel elected.
Let's get a Democratic president elected and get that decided. I actually have been quite worried this week, but when I saw the poor performance last night, as the commentators were saying, we can beat this guy. So I didn't feel that way earlier in the week, but
You raised your hand.
anyway.
I wasn't watching him, so